Hello, my name is Catherine Harrigus, Communications Coordinator for the Tennessee Bar Association. Thank you for joining us for this second part of our interview with TBA President Lucian Pera. Today we will hear a little about Lucian's goals for the bar year, the potential challenges the organization faces, and his thoughts on the evolving legal market.
We've got two things that are real important to the leadership of the bar this year. One of which is the fact that after a 20-year run, Alan Ramser, our executive director, has moved on to be executive director emeritus. He's a great executive director. We have a great executive director coming in who we've hired, Joycelyn Stevenson. Joycelyn is a wonderful lawyer and leader, and she's our new executive director effective in a few days. My number one job, the board's number one job this year, is to do everything we can to make her be as effective as she possibly can. So that's number one with a bullet. Number two is pretty darned important, but it's the other issue I think we're going to be spending a lot of time on this year. Earlier this spring, a task force appointed by the Supreme Court, the Indigent Representation Task Force, and chaired by former Justice Bill Koch, issued a very comprehensive report on the status of indigent representation in Tennessee. Let's just say, you can read the whole 195-page report if you want to, but let's just say it paints an accurate and not very pretty picture of where indigent representation is in Tennessee. And it also, more importantly, paints a picture of a way forward. It is a comprehensive structure and proposal for how to move indigent representation forward. It is, from what I'm hearing, and I'm no expert on the sort of lobbying or legislative or political piece of it, and I'm not an expert on indigent representation. Nevertheless, everybody tells me, and I think it's true, that this is a once-in-a-generation opportunity to affect and improve indigent representation in Tennessee. And so that's what we're going to do. We're going to push forward on that report and its recommendations in concert, I hope, with the Tennessee Supreme Court and with the task force. And it's hard to say that's our number two priority, but personally it kind of is, because we got to have Joycelyn successful as our executive director, and we will. But I think far and away the other big priority is indigent representation. You know, the truth is, most people who are you think of as really good bar presidents, it's not because they had some brilliant agenda and they brought it in and they made it happen, like Franklin Roosevelt's 100 Days. That's just not how life works. But they were the people in the right place at the right time. A very dear friend of mine, Steve Crane, who has since died, but he was a big ethics person. He was with the Proskauer firm in New York, and he was president of the New York State Bar Association on the day that the airplanes crashed into the Twin Towers. And it, of course, you can imagine, it totally dominated, occupied, his entire year, the bar's entire year, as well as the country's entire year. But I don't think he had any notice that his year was going to be commandeered by a literally world-shaking event. And the fact that Alan is retiring and Joycelyn's coming on board, I certainly didn't have any control over that, but I certainly think it's a great opportunity. And as I say, I don't think, it's not that I would want any choice, but we don't have any choice. That is our number one priority, to make that work right. And as far as indigent representation, we're now at a moment where after work for, I think, several years, that task force, which was appointed, as I recall, by Chief Justice Lee, now the Chief Justice is Jeff Bivens, as you may know. It's been several years. But they put that time to good use, and they produced an amazing report. So here that is popping up on our agenda. We need to deal with it. We need to deal with it now. So yeah, I understand I'm not in control. I get that. But we're going to do the best we can with those issues. And frankly, whatever else comes up this year is something that undoubtedly will. This committee that we have, called the Evolving Legal Markets Committee, was appointed by Bill Harbison 2 years ago, and Jason Long as president this last year, carried that forward. The three of us got together 2 years ago, and we worked this up together because we knew that this was something we all cared about, and it's simply carrying forward that effort. The way I look at it, first of all, my interest in this comes from a number of places, but one place it comes from is that I actually represent, like I said, a lot of lawyers, a lot of law firms, a lot of folks who do business with lawyers and law firms. And so I see in my client work, at least that portion of it, I guess all of it, the changes that are going on out in the market for legal services, and they are remarkable. The last time there were as many changes as we're in the midst of right now was the end of the 19th and the beginning of the 20th century. And most lawyers are lousy at history, but what most lawyers may not realize is that the following things happened in that, pick your time period, several decade-long period. The rise of law schools. There really weren't a meaningful number of law schools before that. The rise of statewide bar admission. If you look in old law books, you see that the author of a certain book is identified as a member of the Memphis Bar. Well, that didn't mean the Memphis Bar Association. It meant that that's where they were sworn in to practice law, as in a court in Memphis, not before the Supreme Court. So in most states, that's when statewide licensure occurred and statewide admission. The Board of Law Examiners in Tennessee dates from, I think it's either 1903 or 1906. Law firms. Law firms on any meaningful scale started to develop in that same time period. And bar associations. Bar associations come from that same period. The TBA is 132 or 3 years old. Same period. The ABA comes from the same period. So during that period, electricity came into being. The railroads were it finally became a dominant force in society, etc. Cars, if you'll remember. So you won't remember, I know, but nevertheless. Okay, so what we see now is, I started practicing law in 1985. And a lawyer taken out of, pick whatever date you want at the end of that change at the beginning of the 20th century, let's say 1930 or 40 or whatever. Pick a lawyer up from that era and drop them down in 1986 in a law firm. They would recognize where they were. They wouldn't find it astounding. Phones would be a little more complicated. And you'd get a FedEx about once a week, and they wouldn't know what that was. Okay, but we didn't know what that was. The sign of importance as a lawyer in 1985 when I started practicing, the sign that you were working on something really important was that you got a FedEx package. The person at the front desk would virtually bring it to you on a plate going, oh, this must be important, right? Faxes were still new. Somebody watching this might remember FedEx had a product where they were trying to corner the fax market called Zap Mail. And it was a dedicated machine for the purpose of sending faxes, right? Well, cheap fax machines destroyed that. But nevertheless, point being, that was just before, I started practicing just before all these changes started to roil through the market. Because by the early 90s, we have the internet, we have email, we have, instead of, fancy typewriters that were electric and might have had, a disk you could move in and out of them, we had computers, right? That change is only in the last 10 years or so started to finally roil through the legal market. So you've got changes in communication, the technology we use, the mobility of lawyers and clients. You've got let's call it globalization, right? And what that all means is that, the solo lawyer who's doing divorce work, half of their practice is divorce work, has many more today issues where they have to deal with clients who have issues in other states than they ever have before, right? They may have custody issues that range over 3 states to deal with, and that's not something that was as common. They may represent the local dry cleaner who has a dispute with a vendor in China. They may buy their chemicals from China. That wasn't true 30 years ago. So all those changes, and especially the technology, have meant that lawyers, the business we're in, is changing. And finally, you can now see it. You can now see it with law firms. You can see that if you're a big lawyer, you may think you know something about your market by looking at the AmLaw 100 statistics or the National Law Journal 250 statistics. But that doesn't even reflect the fact that Axiom and Counsel on Call are in some sense your competitors now. And by the way, they're not law firms. They're owned by non-lawyer investors. They're not law firms. They're not bound by the same rules that you are. If you're a solo, you can now do marketing on the internet using such sophisticated techniques of attracting clients that, 20 years ago would have been inconceivable. And probably 20 years ago, the Board of Professional Responsibility would have told you was unethical, the kind of arrangement they had. Something like Google AdWords. Buying Google AdWords, if you tried to convince Lance Bracey 20 years ago that buying Google AdWords for a divorce lawyer in Memphis was okay, he would be worried that that was paying for a referral. We've gotten past that. We think that's now advertising. But those are the kind of changes that are going on. And the bottom line is that they're not, I don't want to say they're inevitable, but they're powerful market forces that are changing the market that we're in, that we work in as lawyers. And most of us as lawyers do not understand them. The market is very difficult to follow, to see, to understand. And we've got to deal with it. So the TBA, there are two jobs that this committee, the Evolving Legal Markets Committee, has to do, in my opinion. One is investigation, let's call it. One of their jobs is to go figure out, watch, observe what's going on in the marketplace, and to be in a position to observe it sufficiently that they can then, number two, educate Tennessee lawyers. And by that I mean educate Tennessee lawyers on how to use some of the new techniques and tools, but also how to respond to them. There's a lot of angst out there about Avo and Rocket Lawyer and LegalZoom. Well, okay, it seems to me that one question bar associations ought to help their members figure out is, can I use these? Is it ethical? Is it legal to use them? And if it is legal to use them, how do I use them? What's the best way to use them? And oh, by the way, even if I don't want to use them, how do I compete against them or lawyers who are using them? And those are questions I think we need to have to give Tennessee lawyers some help on.